Hey Queens, welcome to the Sister Circle podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing candid conversations, information, and resources regarding women's health, mental health, motherhood, and wellness. And I am your homegirl and host, Faith Alaribe. So go ahead and get comfortable, Queen. Let's dig in. Hey, what's going on, good folks? I'm actually really excited about today's episode. I know that I say that before each of my episodes, but I'm actually really excited about today's episode. I have the privilege of sitting down with Maricela Guzman, who is a psychotherapist who lives in the Long Beach or Southern California area. And she so happens to be my old college roommate. Super excited about the work that she's doing, not only as it relates to mental health, but also she owns a really dope jewelry line. And I'll be dropping all of this information in the show notes. But it's called Balance Within Jewelry. And so today's episode is interesting, not only because she's hitting on, talking about, how to understand mental health disorders, but also she's talking about how do you really put together a toolkit that allows you to have, true mental wellness. So she's talking about everything from mindfulness to breathing techniques and even crystals, right? And so I think that not only will you find out really substantive information as it relates to mental health disorders, but you also will make sure that by the end of this episode that your toolkit is filled with some valuable new and incredible resources. So with that being said, no further ado, let's dig in. All right. So listen, I am so excited to introduce you all to one of my roommates from college, really good friend, and who is now a psychotherapist, Maricela Guzman. So Mari, listen, I am excited to have you. I'm excited for you to drop some gems for the Sister Circle listeners. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Mari?
Okay. Well, first of all, hello, and thank you for being here and taking the time to listen. I'm super excited to be able to share with you guys just some information about me and just about mental health and just about, crystals. So primarily first, my name is Maricela Guzman. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I am based out of California and also licensed in California. As many that at this time, due to the pandemic, I am primarily offering just telehealth services. So that's actually kind of a blessing because now that just gives me opportunity to be able to see more people in the state of California where I'm not restricted to only, Southern California, primarily Huntington Beach is where I'm located at this time. So a little bit about me in terms of just my holistic side. So the way that I actually kind of do some of my services through mental health services, I'm actually able to do the holistic side, which is like the mind, body, soul. That is kind of like my forte. And that is the one thing that I kind of derive when it comes to my practice. And in extension to my practice, which is completely separate, I also have a very creative side where I also use gemstones and crystals, which also serve as meditative resources and as well as being able to make jewelry.
Awesome. So you've told us a lot about your A side to your business card, as I like to call it. What's on the B side? Who is Mari? Like I know Mari very well, as we lived together for an entire year. And so like, tell us who you are. Where'd you grow up? How did you grow up?
Sure. So a little bit about me. So I actually grew up in LA, and I know for all of you guys who are from LA, that is a very huge place. So to kind of refine it a little bit more for you, I grew up in between the cities of Culver City, Venice, and Marina del Rey. So that's kind of the area where I grew up. So growing up there, which we would consider West LA, was a very, I guess I would call it was kind of like middle class, and I think it was definitely an area where it was safe. and was really a great place to live. I got to meet a lot of people. I got to definitely have a lot of childhood friends who I still am very connected with and still have a relationship with. So it was very much so a community, which I think was definitely a really great thing. We had a lot of that stuff that we were able to like play outside, right? And in that time, we didn't really have much technology. So we really were able to do some of those, social skills and do problem solving and all those things that, kids maybe at this time don't really get to do just because we're in a different time. But with that as well, my parents actually separated when I was 7 years old. So when my parents separated, obviously I lived, with my mom primarily, but that also brought in a lot of factors, right? Me being the oldest, I also have two younger brothers, actually have a half brother and a younger brother. And being able to working on those things also amounted for me to be able to and have to kind of be the mediator between my parents, which definitely created a lot of anxiety, right? I think at the age of 7, the ones that I could vividly really remember is like the age of 10, 11, 12, were kind of more of those years where I had to kind of serve and act as that role. Was very stressful for me, right? And it took a lot of things out of me in the sense of like having to constantly double check what I was going to say, feeling nervous, feeling anxious. It's again, playing those roles that a child should not be playing at that time, right? I mean, that's the reality. If I can go back to my younger self, is that those roles were not roles that I should be playing at that time, right? So I think that time was very pivotal for me in having to really realize and resonate that I actually had anxiety at a very young age. And the truth for me was that it didn't really spike up for me. And I say spike up because it manifested in actual panic attacks until I was in graduate school. But now that I can go back and now that I'm a psychotherapist, I can really see how it kind of defined and it grew in me in the different like cycles of my life, right? Or the different stages of my life, so to say. I think that would resonate with a lot of people, but I think primarily with people of color, right? When I think about Latinos and the Black community, I think we have a lot of things that resonate with us. We have a culture that's beautiful, right? That also brings a lot of things where there is a lot of like, children who have to kind of take on those roles or responsibilities, right? Because that's just kind of the climate that we grew up in and the culture that we grew up in. So I think in being able to work, right, with a lot of different, populations and working a lot with the Black and Latino community, that's like the constant theme that I see, right? A lot of these roles, a lot of these defined things that are like kind of happen that are kind of unsaid or untold, right? Because that's the reality. Let's keep it real right now. We're talking about therapy, but like, is that something that's really accepted? Right?
For a long time, it has not been. And I think that's a large part of why, a lot of people have asked me like, Faith, why do you always talk about going to therapy? Because I want to normalize that. More people should go to therapy. When I was at my old job, on Tuesdays at 12 noon, I would be gone. And I say, oh, you want to know where I'm going? I'm going to therapy, right? More of you guys should probably be going to therapy. So tell me this. So what was it about grad school in particular that you feel really brought on those panic attacks or, that heightened sense of anxiety?
Sure. I think for me now, going back in retrospect and thinking about it, I think it was like an overload. There was just so much that was going on in my life at that moment, such as, I was still working a full-time job. I was doing graduate school part-time, but I mean, it really, the capacity and the work, it sometimes even felt like full-time, right? And then I was obviously in my very young 20s. So obviously I still wanted to have a social life, right? I still wanted to do things that I had to do. And I had all these separate responsibilities and factors that kind of played into my life. And I was just on the go, honestly. Like
all the time.
all the time. I sometimes felt like, did I even breathe? And to be honest with you, in that time, I was still living with my mom, and she would have to like, I would literally be glued. I still remember this, like being glued to my laptop, like trying to finish up that paper, right? So I could go out and have fun and de-stress with my friends. And she would even say, like, have you gone to the restroom? Like, did you eat? like not even taking care of like my basic needs, right? And understanding that like I was in this mindset of go, go, go. And when we're in that mindset, yeah, it's doable, but our body is it could only withstand so much. And that's what my body had to do for me to give me that response of like the panic attack, to like kind of create like that shock to my body of like, you need to slow down.
So, it's interesting. As you talk about having your first panic attack in grad school, that's actually when I had my first one. So, Madi, what would you say is like the difference between having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, or maybe an anxiety episode?
Sure. So the difference between those two is that when you say an anxiety episode or, anxiety attack, that usually is generated by something that you've been triggered by, right? So for example, a clear example is maybe being able to have maybe been in a really bad car accident, and like the sound, right, of screeching tires can kind of trigger you, right? So that can kind of, again, just put your body in a sense of alarm, right? And then trigger you, which can cause you some distress, which we would call more of an anxiety episode, right? So it can be, it can kind of put you in alert, make you a bit nervous, maybe start thinking about things that have happened, right? That's one thing. Actual panic attack is like when your body biologically, if we go back to basics and we think about like, fight or flight and freeze, right? That's another one. So there's fight, right? There's a fight mode, flight mode, and freeze. So those different modes are, again, it's our body's natural, like, mechanism to kind of defend itself, right? From anything that's causing it fear. So when we get into that hyper alert, state, that's when that true panic attack comes in, right? And for a lot of people, the panic attacks look different, but very common things is like they get the tunnel vision, right? They tense up. They start to feel like they're having like a heart attack, right? They get a lot of pressure in their chest, pressure in their, their throat, they get tightness in their throat. They can't breathe. I mean, I know exactly what that feels like because I've gone through those, right? And it feels literally like nothing anybody says to you or does in that moment is gonna, you feel like you're dying. I mean, I've had one so bad to the point where I'm like, I'm gonna start breathing.
Yeah, I feel it. Like, I feel you in its entirety. I felt completely out of control. Like, I felt, the heart palpitations. My breathing was very short. And there was one time that it was really bad that I almost even felt nauseous. Like, and it could last, like, one is last, let's say 3 minutes. And then another is last almost as long as an hour. It has this like lingering effect. And it's like, no matter what I do, it's like I can, take as many deep breaths as possible, which I will say is helpful. But it's like, until it like really passes, I feel like I can't do anything. And it's scary as hell. It's real scary.
And I love that you brought that up because this is like one of those little gems that I always give to any of my clients that I'm working with that have anxiety or have panic attacks, right? The reality is that our body has to do what it has to do in order to self-regulate itself. So the minimum time that your body goes from, that 0 to 100 of like being in that panic attack is anywhere from like 20 minutes to like 40 minutes. That's the reality. And that's why, again, that intensity of emotions, the intensity of the psychosomatic reactions, right, that your body is going through is actually biologically, it has to kind of get through that hump and get through that until you're able to get back to baseline, right? Which would be a normal state, which we are in right now, right? Like you're calm and you're relaxed. So that is important to know. And I think that that's the most important thing that anybody who is suffering from anxiety or any symptoms of anxiety or panic attacks in this specific, situation that we're referring to, I think it's important that they are able to understand like that is part of the process of your body. But yes, as you said, there is things, right, that you can do in the meanwhile to kind of help alleviate the intensity of it. Right. And a lot of those things are something that we can do. And again, one of the very basic things that we all have that's attainable to us is deep breathing. And I know it sounds very, very simple, but there's actually an art to it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like I think people say like, oh, deep breathing. I'm like, but are you really deep breathing? Right? Like, were you breathing from like your diaphragm? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're really like slowing down and breathing, right? Which I'll kind of give some tips and what are some of my tips and tools that I kind of use that are always available to kind of help you with anxiety. But again, deep breathing, just calming down, slowing down, and really just being mindful of your breath is the biggest way that you can, again, just naturally calm your system down.
Yeah. Deep breathing is definitely helpful. I think one of the scariest times in which I had a panic attack, it was my first time going downtown since the pandemic had began. And, downtown Chicago, as soon as you go underground, you can get lost, right? And I'm used to going to my doctor's office, like taking a train or a bus because my office was, in close proximity, or even an Uber. So I was driving down there and I continued to get lost. And I was like, I really need to go to the doctor because I hadn't been feeling like myself and I wanted that support. So, I looked at the clock and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm about to be late for my appointment. And I kept getting lost and I felt it coming on and I was like, oh shit, okay. So I was like, let me call the doctor's office and let me just, let them know I'm running late. I'm almost there. I think I'm almost there, right? So I called the office and she's like, well, let me check in with the doctor and let me see and I'll call you right back. And I was like, okay. So I'm driving and I get lost again in the circle. And so she calls and I was like, oh shit, I had turned down the wrong street, but it was also a one-way and cars were coming towards me. And she said, are you okay? I said, no. And I was just like, oh shit. Like I was just screaming. Like I was just,
in a panic,
right? Mm-hmm. And she said, you are in control. She said, stop, put the car, put the brakes on or whatever and breathe. Like as you hear my voice, I want you to take a deep breath. And I was just, breathing. And she was just like, you are okay. All is well. You are in control. You are stopped. The cars see you. Like, I just remember her talking. I had this tunnel vision, like you referred to. I didn't see anything else. All I heard was the sound of her voice. And I was so grateful for her at that time. I'm sorry, I'm getting really emotional because it was so scary. Mm-hmm. And I knew something was wrong. And I was trying to get the help. And
this is a reality that a lot of people go through, and it's important that we're transparent, right? And that we can show this, that even the strongest, like I tell my clients all the time, like, how can I be the best therapist if I can't get help? Like, it's just, that's the reality. And like, the help is there and it's available, and we need to tap into what those resources are, right? And if it's, if it's through this podcast, if it's through, finding education through people or having to go to professional help, like that, we have to normalize that. Like, this is normal. And I think, again, that is one of the biggest and most important things for me as a psychotherapist, and as a trait, being a social worker, is the accessibility of mental health services is like the most important thing to me.
Yeah, it was, it was crazy. I just hadn't felt like myself, and it was just so much. And I'm so grateful to that woman who was on the line with me. And I remember going into the office, finally getting there and sitting in my car. And then I got lost on the way walking. I had to, so I finally get there and there was a woman who was at the receptionist desk because I go to a integrative practice, and she was like, "Oh, can I offer you a cup of chamomile tea? And here, take this." And it was like a napkin that she had, and she had put some lavender oil on it. And she said, "Just cover your mouth and just breathe in." And she said, "The doctor's going to see you, this, that, and the other." I was like, "Where is the woman who I was talking to?" And she's like, "She's not here." And I was like, "Well, she's an angel, and just make sure that you tell her thank you."
Oh.
And so it's just like those small little things. And it's just like, you just never know what someone is going through.
Mm-hmm. And the impact of words, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And giving others grace, but also giving yourself grace too.
Yes. I mean, you couldn't have said it more perfect. I think that we are always, as human beings, we, whatever practice we do, right? We want to help others, but sometimes we forget to do that for ourselves. And like, that is real. Like, we really have to be there for ourselves. We have to give ourselves that same grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
We really do.
But, I think that at this time, like in dealing with a ton of social media consumption, right? We have been in isolation for darn near 10 months at this point. And just all of the chaos that's been going on in the nation, particularly for people of color, because we are the most who have been, impacted by this, right? I'm sure it's a lot of folks who are feeling or who are not feeling like themselves. And so some folks might be self-diagnosing themselves and, all of this, and so I want you to, if you could share with me, I would even say that there's probably a diagnosis of pandemic anxiety that exists, right? And if it doesn't exist, I'm sure, 2, 3, 20 years from now, they're going to, designate it as a real thing. But what are some of the different types of mental health disorders, particularly those that you see most often in your practice?
Sure. Yeah. I think to touch on just with the pandemic anxiety, it's not a formal diagnosis. I don't doubt that I'm sure at one point it will become one. But yes, there is a lot of people who are, potentially self-diagnosing or maybe meeting a lot of the traits, right, and criteria for the different types of anxiety disorders. For me, some of the areas that I specialize in are anxiety, depression, and trauma. Those are my primary specialties. So in regards to anxiety, as you mentioned, so in my particular practice, with just working people who already had anxiety even to begin with before the pandemic, right? I have just seen them actually having just higher symptoms of anxiety or manifestations of anxiety, right? A lot of psychosomatic reactions, in addition to having to be in the pandemic and essentially in a lockdown, which here in California, we are back in that, which we were in the beginning as well, is the fact that, we are isolated, right? We are confined to our homes unless you're an essential worker. You have to live, breathe, work, do school, everything in your home, right?
Yeah. So you talk about like a heightened sense, but what does anxiety like generally look like on an everyday basis for someone who may experience it?
Yeah. So some of the defining, I guess, traits that you would say about anxiety are just people who have a very difficult time in just like managing what anxiety is, right? First and foremost, I think the most important thing is that anxiety is normal. Okay. I think we have to normalize that. But the difference between normal anxiety and what we would categorize as the diagnosis of any form of anxiety is the fact that it inhibits you from being able to complete your daily task, right? Or just things that are, again, of basic normality. That's the difference between the normal anxiety, that internal drive that we all have that kind of motivates us, right, and pushes us to do things, versus when it inhibits us. So some of the symptoms are, some of the common psychosomatic ones, right? Is a lot of people actually have like, just kind of trouble like breathing, right? You have a difficult time in breathing, have chest pain. A lot of people sometimes have, and this is a really big one. I think it happens, in a lot of different, with a lot of different people, but I think a lot with just people of color is we actually have a lot of psychosomatic reactions that are related to the stomach, to like the gastrointestinal issues, right? So when we think about GERD, or you think about like acid reflux or stomach aches and things of that sort, if you go kind of back to basics with like kids, like the kids that are constantly having stomach aches, yeah, it could be the fact that it could be different reasons, but a lot of it has to do with anxiety. And that is one of the biggest things that I can go back and look at as a child myself and had to go through. And even within my career of working with little ones and younger ones, is that was a really, really big one. And even for me, I mean, I remember like in grad school, I had to go to the GI doctor, I don't know how many times, because I was like, okay, I have acid reflux. And then they said, oh, I think you have GERD. I think you have this. And it was always something related to my stomach, but it was always related to anxiety. And that's what I had to really like look into. And sometimes we think it's truly a medical condition, but that's where I talk about the mind, body, and soul. Like they're all interconnected. Our body is in sync and it's connected to our brain, and it's all in sync. So we need to recognize that sometimes when we're dealing with a mental health issue, it could even be physical at times.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So what are some of the other signs that lead towards like anxiety? So I think that for me, some of the things that I've experienced have been like brain fog, has been like lack of concentration or focus, the inability to like really shut off my thoughts, particularly at nighttime when I would think I'm ready to go to sleep and my mind would just be racing. Are there any other signs that may point to that?
Sure. Yeah. Those are also common ones. Also in the sense of like inability to sleep, right? Insomnia is a really big one too, that not only in relation to depression, but also with anxiety, right? So insomnia, that could be like inability to fall asleep, or that could also translate to like be staying asleep for an hour and then waking up and then not being able to go back to sleep, right? Like you mentioned, the brain fog, that's a very common one as well, in addition to like just feeling like you can't get anything done, right? Like the lack of motivation is a big one too. Is like you can have an entire list of things that you have to get done and you just don't know or can't find where to start, and sometimes you just don't start, right? That's a big one. That's a big one when it comes to both anxiety and depression. There's also like the eating, right? A lot of people, that's a big one. Sometimes that we don't talk about, like with anxiety, a lot of people, actually find eating comforting, right? And it's a form of comfort of like eating, or, some people just can't eat because they just have no motivation. So there's just different types and, different things that kind of lead to anxiety and the manifestation of it. But I think, again, a lot of the psychosomatic things is what happens, and the thoughts, right? Like the thoughts that come in, like the rumination of thoughts, fixating on certain things, and having to do things in order, which is, again, more of like OCD traits, but still falls under the category of anxiety.
Yeah, so that's great. What about depression? I think that a lot of folks are, far more comfortable with saying, oh, I have anxiety, but are far less comfortable with saying, you know what, I'm depressed. And myself included. I think that there have been probably 2 times in my life in particular that I can like fully note and say, you know what, I really think that I was depressed. One of those times was when I first moved to Chicago, where I basically knew very few people. And the folks that I did know were kind of going through their own thing at that time. And then another time was when I had moved back to LA. And I wanted to leave, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to get the hell up out of LA. And so eventually I figured it out, and I got through those dark times. But again, I think that it's just now, after all of these years, I'm just now comfortable with saying I think that I had experienced a bout of depression. So talk to me a little bit about what depression is, what it looks like, and how it may manifest in our lives.
Sure. I think I also want to normalize that, when it comes to like feelings of depression is something that we all experience in our lives at one point in time, right? But again, as I had mentioned, there's like the clinical depression, right? A diagnosis. Yes. And then there's like what I would call in simple terms, like the blues. We all get the blues, right? And I love the fact that you were able to kind of share like your experience of like transitioning to Chicago, transitioning back to LA. Those two situations is what we would maybe call more of an adjustment disorder, right? And adjustment disorders can actually have flavors of anxiety, depression, or even sometimes mixed anxiety and depression, right? So that's one thing. But when it comes to, again, there's different criteria that you need to meet in order to really be defined as like major depression disorder or the other types of depression disorders that there is. But the important thing is to recognize of like what's really happening. So some of the biggest telltale signs, I guess, or indicators that are of true depression are being able to like, we're talking about like more than 2 weeks, right? Like you can't get out of bed, right? You're not actually able to kind of be productive or do the normal things that you're used to doing, right? Like there's just a drastic change in how you function and how you do things. It could also, again, sleep. That's a huge one, right? Like, especially when you're thinking about a person who's like true clinical, major depressive disorder is someone who's like, just sleeping for like 9-11 hours sometimes, right? Like just sleeping for long periods of time. And a lot of that times it's because, again, biologically, there's an imbalance, right, in our body. And that's causing it. But it also, a lot of the times people are wanting to just numb, right? Or not have to feel, right, what they're going through. And if we're talking about numbing, I mean, I know that sometimes people even use substance use, right? Or drugs to kind of, again, create or mimic those same effects to just not feel what we're having to like go through, right? Another really big thing, and it's very common when it comes to major depressive, is bereavement, right? Grief and loss. So that's something that we don't talk about a lot, right? And something that, again, is happening, is very real, that's happening with the pandemic right now, right? Like we are losing a lot of people to this health crisis that we're going through, right? And not only because of COVID, but it could be in relation to other medical conditions and whatever the case may be, right? We're grieving differently also, right? We're not in a normal state where we can still do the things that we want to do. So things just look so different.
So when you talk a little bit about grief and bereavement, like grief and bereavement, it doesn't necessarily just mean like the loss in terms of death of someone, right?
Right.
It could be the end of a relationship, whether that is with a partner, whether that is a friendship that's ended, a job that's ended, things like that, right? Those are things that we could experience grief or bereavement around as well. Would you say that's correct?
That's accurate, and it's absolutely correct. We're grieving our life right now, our normal life. That's what we're doing right now. Yes. I mean, I could say I definitely am. Like, I think that's definitely something for everyone, right? We are all grieving what normal used to be. Like, this is something that, again, none of us have ever experienced, right? And collectively, we're all going through, we're all surviving, going through the motions. And, we could potentially see a light at the end of the tunnel, but at every single moment, there's a change that puts us back somewhere, or, right? So it's like we're getting pushed and pulled in like every single direction. And that itself can be categorized as a grief and loss because
Oh
we
my
are
gosh.
grieving that.
Yes. I feel like every month, I feel like I'm bracing myself for like, what is next? You know what I mean? Like from, the pandemic happening, to like, I lost my father as a result of COVID in July. So, things like that. You have layoffs that are happening. You have, the election, right? It's just all of these things. And so it's like this constant bracing oneself, and anticipating something more or worse happening than the last thing that happened. So
Sure.
I get that. I get that a lot. So you talked a lot about anxiety. You talked about depression. But one of the things that you had mentioned, that you see most often in your practice has to do with like PTSD, trauma related. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that might look like, or what exactly is PTSD?
Sure. Yeah. So post-traumatic stress disorder. So that is pretty much any kind of situation, and that's when someone is in a place where their life can be altered. Right. There's a life altering motive or event. Right. So when we think about something like that, it can be like a really bad car accident that you were in, right, where your life was in danger, or potentially another person's life was in danger. It's your own perceived life danger that kind of gets categorized in our brain, right? And kind of signals, again, some of those reactions that we mentioned earlier, which is, like that startle, like hypervigilance, right? Like when we hear the screeching car, that can be one of those things that can happen. Sometimes which is not, sometimes a lot of people don't even realize this. Sometimes certain smells, certain situations, like if you go back to the same place where something happened, like your body can just like flip from one to another and like alert you, right? Like you can feel the tension coming up. You can feel all those things kind of happening. That's another thing that, again, happens a lot, that is not usually, talked about very often sometimes. Other symptoms are, actually having flashbacks. Those are real things that people have. Like you can literally sometimes go back to that experience and not be able to distinguish if you're in the here or in the now, right? Like you sometimes can feel some people's flashbacks can be that intense where they can feel like they're back in that moment. And I mean, this is more of a very like severe level of PTSD, right? But again, just things of that sort are just like kind of like those defining things. A lot of the things, again, for people is just being able to just be like fearful, right? Or feel like they have to hold back by certain things that maybe has caused them distress.
It's interesting. I think that the first time that I'd heard about like PTSD, it like evolved. It was evolving around like a lot of the veterans that were coming back and they were experiencing high levels of PTSD. Sure. But I would never like prior to, actually, now that you're talking about it, I don't think that I ever equated PTSD as something that is as normal as it is. I think that it was interesting once I began going to my therapist in particular. Like she was like, wow, like you've experienced a lot of trauma. And not saying that I have PTSD, but I'm saying that I always thought that, it was part of life, right? We experience certain things. It's like, it's a part of life. And it's like, I never had the language to properly articulate it as trauma. And so it's a lot of things that have happened in our lives, particularly as people of color, from, losing people to violence, to experiencing violence all around us, to, coming up in single parent homes and some of the traumas that may have occurred as a result of that. Like, it's just really fascinating to finally have like, a toolbox, if you will, or just a dictionary of language that really gives color to the experiences that we've had.
I absolutely love that you brought that up, Faith. I mean, I can't strengthen enough of how important it is that, especially in like some of our, for people of color in their communities where things are so normal, right? Like you say, like, violence, right? Crimes. Like I can't even imagine of like how many people have witnessed these things and think that that's what normal is. That's not normal. right? But when you grow up, you grow and breathe in an environment that teaches you that, you think that that's normal. And I think that that's so, so important that people start to recognize that one, there, you know, like you said, there's trauma, right? And again, there's different, you know, criteria that needs to occur in order for you to be diagnosed with PTSD. But again, from a lot of traumatic experiences, we can again desensitize someone, right? Someone can become desensitized to again think that this is normal. And I can give you a perfect example of where this can be very concerning, where let's say someone who has witnessed a lot of violence or like just gang violence or just shootings and things of that sort, right? I can go back and think very early on where, you know, I worked with a child who said, no, that's normal. Like, and you know, whenever I hear a gunshot, like that doesn't even scare me. That's so concerning because now what it's causing is that this is normal for you, right? And the fact that that sound itself is not alarming you to, again, it doesn't scream safety, right? Or doesn't scream of like, I need to be on my A game and make sure I'm okay, right? Keeping myself safe. Because that just increases your chances or your opportunities of being unsafe.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
It
And
is.
that's
Yeah.
what's so important, that we start to again realize that there's you know, there's diagnosis and there's criteria for a reason. And this is why we need to have these conversations, right? So that people
Absolutely.
can understand and know be able to define these things that they're feeling.
Yep. So I think that those are really good examples of anxiety, of depression, as well as PTSD. One of the things that I find to be critically important, particularly for, you know, Sister Circle listeners, is that what are some of the tools that you have found particularly helpful in your practice to assist with managing those things?
Sure. So some of the tools that I find very helpful and that I usually, you know, really provide to my clients and that again are easily accessible, which I think is the most important part, is one of them is the 4-7-8 breathing. So what that is, and we can actually do it together, Faith, if you'd like. So what it is
we're gonna. Girl.
So what it is just pretty much it's just it's a breathing, like a deep breathing, but it's going to be specifically set to 4 seconds, 7 seconds, and 8 seconds. So the 4 seconds we're going to breathe in, 7 seconds we're going to hold our breath in, and then for 8 seconds we're going to release. Okay. So we can go ahead and do it together. So we're going to breathe for 4. We're going to hold for 7. And we're going to release for 8. Okay. Let's go ahead and do it one more time. We're going to do breathe in for 4. Hold for 7. And release for 8.
Oh, I'm feeling all, yeah, that was good. That was good.
Yeah, it's again, a very simple tool. And again, it forces you, right, to focus on your breathing. Right. Because again, when we're talking about, right, when we're doing deep breathing, that's exactly what we're doing, right? We need to stop. And this actually helps us to, again, the counting helps us to stay in the here and now and just strictly focus on the breathing. So that's, again, a tool that you can use on a daily basis or whenever it is that you need. It's, again, the 4-7-8 breathing tool. Okay. So another one is mindfulness. And I know when it comes to mindfulness, that can mean so many things. But a very, very easy way to just practice mindfulness is to practice to being in the here and now, right? So, right in the here and now, I'm talking to Faith, right? I'm not necessarily, of course, there's probably other things that are going through my mind, but I'm just strictly focused on this moment, on this specific words that I'm saying at this moment. And if we are practicing again in the here and now, that is what is considered that true mindfulness. Okay,
so we're not on our we're not busy on our phones, right? Correct. Checking our Instagrams and all that.
We're not doing 5 things at a time. We're literally focused on one task at a time and one thing at a time.
Oh, I need to practice way more mindfulness. I thought I was being mindful, but I guess just those periods of meditation, it's not enough.
Well, meditation and mindfulness are a little bit different. They're still kind of from the same derivative, right? But it's still two different things. So another thing that you could extend your mindfulness, which is again another thing that I like to kind of provide to my clients or even for myself, is doing a mindfulness walk. So when you're walking, right, we can be listening to our headphones, listening to a podcast, music, whatever. But if you truly want to practice doing mindfulness, it's literally like having no distractions and literally just focusing on your steps, focusing on what's in front of you, what you're looking at. I mean, you could even extend it to like, I'm going to look at the grass, I'm going to look at the flowers, I'm going to look at the scenery, and literally just looking at every single thing. And that too is an active way of practicing mindfulness.
Oh, then that means I practiced that yesterday. I went on a mindfulness walk. I was singing Christmas songs throughout the day, waving to some neighbors and stuff.
Skill that you're adding to your mindfulness walk. That's not a bad thing. But if you really want to just, again, practice a simple act of mindfulness, it's literally just staying in the present and the here and now.
Nice.
Yeah. And I also will, I know that there'll be some notes for the podcast, and I will provide you guys all those resources. I've kind of shared some links for some mindfulness like audios that are on YouTube that you can practice that are really helpful. And the last one that I think is really, really good, especially for people, sometimes deep breathing is not effective for everyone. And it's not a tool that is going to always be the best for every single person, right? So another one that I think, again, if you're the type of person who maybe holds a lot of tension in your body or maybe experiences a lot of those psychosomatic reactions, this is the tool for you. So it's called progressive muscle relaxation. And it's a very long, fancy word for tensing up your muscles. Okay, so then you and I, Faith, can do it together just so that you can kind of get
I love practicing the tools.
So what we're going to go ahead and do, I went ahead and sent a link to that. There's a guided one that will take you on doing progressive muscle relaxation for like your entire body. But we'll do one right now. So like, for example, right now, Faith, where would you say that you're feeling the tension in your body?
My neck and my shoulders.
Okay. So what I'm going to go ahead and have you do is I want you to focus on that area. Okay. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you just, again, lift your shoulders high up like that. Tense it as tight as you can and release. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do it a couple more times. So go ahead and tense it up as tight as you can. You want to actually feel like that restraint, right? Like that's the whole purpose. And then I want you to release.
We look like that dude from 90 Day Fiance that don't have no neck. Why are we doing this?
Right? So that's one of the things. So another one, again, a simple one that you can do with your hands is, again, tensing up your hands, right? So make it into a fist, tense it up as tight as you can and release. So do you see how you just kind of like are releasing that tension?
Oh, that is interesting. Even my shoulders, though.
Yeah. We had no neck for a second, but that's okay because you feel like you're having the release of that tension, right? And that's the most important thing, that you could actually do this with like every single muscle of your body and like being able to just, again, collectively release that stress and tension that we carry on a daily basis.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Yeah. So that's a really, again, simple tool. And I love to teach this also to like kids, because kids sometimes don't have like a means of like releasing, and a lot of their releasing comes in verbal, right? Or physical, or being aggressive. So again, this also teaches them, again, like when you feel angry, you can just tense up your muscles and release. Okay. Yeah. So that's definitely, I would say that those are like my 3 top tools that are, again, very effective, and tools that you don't necessarily need anything for. You can just do them. In addition to that, there's also a lot of apps that I recommend. that will also be in the notes where you guys will have access to all those different names. For the most part, they are free. There's some that you have to pay for, but there's a free trial for them. So you could at least try them. If it's something that's worth your while, if you feel like it's something that really helps you, then you can definitely, purchase those, but they're not necessary. But there's several apps that I also recommend when it comes to just anxiety, to how to manage and deal with your anxiety, but more importantly, also to kind of help with identifying, right? Like, what are the sources of anxiety that you have?
Got it. Good stuff. So I know that a large part of kind of like your healing practice or your wellness practice entails crystals, right? So what are some of like your top or, most prevalent crystals that you would say that you use as part of this?
Sure. So the most basic crystals that I use, or the ones that I think would be best for someone who's just kind of starting off with that practice, would be clear quartz. So clear quartz, which I have here, this is clear quartz. So this is in its raw form. And so what this is known as like the manifester. So anything that you pair this with is pretty much like amplifies that. Right? So let's say here,
my clear quartz.
So this is rose quartz. Okay.
Yes, I have a rose quartz.
Okay. So if you were to pair these together, it amplifies the purpose of this one, which is, when it comes to rose quartz, right? This is known as like the top. It's known for like love, right? For love, and that can be all kinds of love. It can be romantic love. It can be self-love. It can be forgiveness. Anything that has to do with matters of the heart or love, this is a crystal for that.
Yes. Okay. Perfect.
And this is additional, but if you're into chakras, this opens up your heart chakra.
Awesome.
So it's accepting love.
Yes, that's awesome. Okay. Accepting love.
Yeah. So then again, the clear quartz can be used alone or can be used paired with something. And again, it's known as the, just pretty much like amplifies anything that is next to.
But the manifester, I like that you called it.
The manifester. Yeah, that's exactly what it's known. My other one that I think is important that everyone should have is amethyst. Okay, so amethyst, yeah. So amethyst is pretty much like best known for its calming properties. Okay, so like this is kind of like your anti-anxiety. That's what I like to call it.
Yes.
So
and
if
that's
you
like
are
the pretty purple one, right?
The pretty purple one, yeah. And it's also the birthstone for February.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's the purple stone, and yes, and again, if you need to have any kind of calming energy, calming vibes, if you're an anxious person, this is definitely the stone for you. In addition to that one, there's also howlite. I don't have it accessible, but it's a white stone, right? That also provides a lot of calming, specifically for anxiety. And again, I'll put my handles to my Facebook and my Instagram, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or any of the things that I have there available. The last one that I think everyone should have is this one, which is black tourmaline. So this is a protection stone, the top protection stone. So this one is always great to have on yourself, to have in your home. And actually, as we're on a laptop, it actually kind of helps with just electromagnetic like fields, right? And like just the effects that kind of can have. That helps with that as well. But again, it's a universal just protection for your aura, right? As we would call in Spanish, like mal de ojo, right? Like evil eye. I know that's also in other religions, the Hamsa, right? There's all these different things that people use, but it's pretty much known as a protection stone. So I carry this, I wear this on a bracelet, or I carry it in my purse. I have it in different corners of my home. This is like one of my top ones as well, because it's, again, just for protection.
So, but before we go, I want to know what is bringing you joy, and what are some of your practices that you're, adding to your own toolkit, particularly during these times, that you found to be helpful and that you would like to share.
Sure. So one of the things that is very consistent and that I try to do on a daily basis is like kind of like my AM like meditation or gratitude practice. So I try to give myself anywhere from like 10 to 15 minutes of just being able to again set like the foundation, right, for my day. And so that could be, doing a meditation, that could be a grateful practice, which can be verbal or even in a journal format where I just write what I'm thankful for. So that's again 10 minutes that I do kind of start every day with. And then at night, I have a routine where I use an oil diffuser. I know you kind of mentioned about just the lavender oil earlier. That's also a really, really big component for me because I am a person who really needs a lot of like again grounding, right? And sense smells. I mean that's something that's very important to me. So I do use essential oil with the diffuser, and then pair that with kind of just like a meditation, right? That I kind of use to just like help me to transition from like work mode and day mode to sleep mode and have restful sleep. That's the ultimate goal as to why I practice that. And something as simple as that makes such a big step, especially when it becomes a routine. I think when it comes to resources, a lot of the times we practice it like here and there, like, oh, I'll try that, right? But it's about the routine and the structure. That's what really sticks. That's the most important thing that we really, really need to hone in and like stay true to.
I couldn't agree more. Even this week, the beginning of the week, I felt like, really anxious. And then I look back and I was just like, you know what, Faith, you got all these tools that are in your toolkit, such as your meditation practice. I read my daily devotional, all these things. And it's something that you haven't prioritized. So, beginning Wednesday, I started back, doing my meditations, doing my devotionals. And also doing my prayer. I feel like prayer is when I'm asking God, the universe, for things, whether it is for clarity on different things or healing for myself, for other people, etc. And then I feel like meditation is me sitting back and and opening up the ability to hear from him. So I find that to be really helpful. And then, my daily devotional, listen, Until Today by Ayanna Van Zant has been one of those gems that I've kept with me for like 10 plus years. And so those things have literally helped me tremendously. But now I'm going to add that, what is it, the 478? I'm going to add that into my practice on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Creating that routine, because you can have all the tools in the world. You can buy all of the sage, the Palo Santo, the crystals and all that. But if you don't make it a practice of using all of these things and these tools that you have, then it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And that, I know that that's the hardest part, right? Is being able to build a routine and a structure. But I can also let you know, like, that is the biggest benefit. So, like, again, you have your toolbox, right? You know what works for you. What works for me is not going to work for Faith. It's not going to work for the next person. I always say that you need to find what works for you and replicate that and like continue to do it. And that's the key to really seeing if it works for you or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to get this, self-care practice down packed, especially now as I'm entering into my 8th month of pregnancy. I need to be as chill as possible so this baby can come out and as chill as possible. So yeah, I'm excited though. But
for sure.
thank you so much, Mari, for coming and sharing your, dropping some gems on podcast listeners and, just being a wealth and an open book and sharing your individual experience as well. So I'm excited to share particularly about, your jewelry line. I'm going to purchase my first piece. Hold me to it. By the end of this week, it will be purchased because I want to wear it for Christmas. So I look forward to that, and yeah, and letting folks know where to find you.
Thank you. Well, it was a pleasure being on your podcast. And thank you so much for allowing me this space to just kind of share this information. And thank you again.
Thank you so much for listening. It is truly my hope that you both enjoyed and gained something from it. And if so, be sure to share this episode with another queen that could benefit. Also, if you are willing and able, please leave me a 5-star review wherever you consume your podcast. That is how we spread the good word, y'all. And in the meantime, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at The Sister Circle Podcast. And be sure to check out the website, thesistercirclepodcast.com. There you can subscribe to our mailing list to ensure you get reminders about when new episodes drop and receive our monthly newsletter that's filled with great resources. You can check out our show notes, resources, and blog. And you can send me a message if you want to be on the show, have an idea for the show, would like to collaborate, or sponsor the show. With love, Faith.